There is a cruel law that governs the lives of the kindest people, and almost none of them know it exists. The more they give, the less they are valued. The more available they make themselves, the more they are taken for granted. The more they love, the more they are treated as ordinary, replaceable background. They spend their lives believing that if they are just generous enough, patient enough, good enough, they will finally earn the love and respect they ache for. And instead, they watch colder, more withholding people get chased, adored, prioritized, while they, who give everything, are quietly moved to the bottom of everyone's list. Carl Jung understood this law better than almost anyone, and what he discovered about it is disturbing because it means the problem was never that these people gave too little. It was that they gave in a way that trained the whole world to devalue them. Before we go further, understand exactly what this is about. This is not a video that tells kind people to become cruel, or to stop giving, or to close their hearts. Jung had no interest in turning warm people cold. What he identified was something far more precise and far more useful: the exact mechanism by which generosity, offered from the wrong place inside a person, teaches others to take without valuing, and slowly erases the giver from their own life. Over the next 20 minutes, we're going to trace why the more a person gives, the less they are valued, the specific signs that someone has fallen into this trap, what is really happening in the psyche of the endless giver, and the single shift Jung believed a person must make before their kindness can finally command the respect it deserves. Stay until the end, because the final movement is the one that turns a doormat back into a person, and almost no one is ever shown how. Let's begin with the law itself and why it works the way it does. Jung understood something about the human mind that most kind people never grasp. People do not value what is freely and endlessly available. They value what is scarce, what has limits, what could be lost. This is not because people are evil. It is simply how the psyche assigns worth. A thing that is always there, that costs nothing to receive, that will never be withdrawn no matter how it is treated, quietly loses its value in the mind of the receiver, not through any conscious decision, but automatically, the way a sound you hear constantly fades into background noise, and the endless giver makes themselves exactly this: a constant, unconditional, always available presence. They remove every limit, every cost, every possibility of loss. And in doing so, without ever intending to, they train the people around them to stop noticing them at all. This is the first brutal piece of the law. The kind person believes that giving more will make them more valued. But value, in the human mind, does not work by addition. It works by scarcity and by cost. And so every increase in their availability produces a decrease in their perceived worth. They give more and are valued less, and cannot understand why. So they give even more, trying to fix it, which lowers their worth even further. It is a spiral, and it runs in the exact opposite direction of what they believe. They are pouring water into a bucket with a hole they themselves are drilling wider with every act of unconditional giving. There are signs a person has fallen into this trap, and they are worth naming, because most people living it cannot see it from the inside. They are the one who always says yes, and feels a flash of guilt on the rare occasion they say no. They are the one whose needs somehow never make it onto the table, because they are so busy tending everyone else's. They are the friend who reaches out first, every time, and quietly notices that almost no one reaches out to them. They apologize for things that are not their fault, to smooth a tension that was never theirs to smooth. They give more in every relationship than they receive, and they call this being a good person, while a quiet, buried resentment grows underneath, one they are ashamed to even feel. If several of these describe someone, they are not simply generous. They have fallen into the law, and it is slowly erasing them. If this is landing on something you have lived, comment the word value below. Jung believed that seeing the law clearly is the first crack in a pattern that has run a person's entire life, because the second thing Jung understood is far deeper. Why a person becomes an endless giver in the first place. On the surface, endless giving looks like pure virtue. A person simply born generous. But Jung, who spent his life looking beneath surfaces, saw something else underneath it in most cases. He saw that compulsive, boundaryless giving is very often not generosity at all. It is a strategy learned early in a childhood where love had to be earned, where a person discovered that the only reliable way to secure affection and avoid rejection was to be useful, agreeable, and endlessly accommodating. The child learned that their needs were a burden, that their anger was dangerous, that their only safe value lay in what they could give. And so they became the giver, not because their soul overflowed, but because giving was the price of admission to love, and they paid it, over and over, for the rest of their lives. Jung understood that this kind of giving has a hidden transaction buried inside it. The endless giver is not truly giving freely. Underneath, they are making a silent bargain. I will give you everything, and in return you will love me, choose me, never leave me. And people feel this bargain, even when they cannot name it. They feel the neediness underneath the generosity, the quiet demand attached to the gift, the way the giving is not quite a gift but a plea. And this is part of why it repels rather than attracts. A gift given freely from fullness draws people in. A gift given from emptiness that secretly needs something back, that will curdle into hurt if it is not repaid, that makes people uneasy, and they pull away, and the giver, wounded, gives even harder, tightening the very trap they are caught in. And here Jung named the deepest cost, the one that goes beyond how others treat the giver. He understood that the person who builds their entire worth on giving has, in doing so, abandoned themselves. Every yes they did not mean, every need they swallowed, every boundary they refused to set to keep the peace, was a small act of self-betrayal. And these accumulate. The endless giver slowly disappears, not just in the eyes of others, but in their own. They lose contact with what they actually want, what they actually feel, what they would actually say if they were not so busy managing everyone else's comfort. They become a function instead of a person. And the terrible irony is that the more thoroughly they erase themselves to be loved, the less there is of them left to love. You cannot value a person who has disappeared, and the endless giver disappears first from their own life. But Jung did not leave people trapped in the diagnosis because he was always more interested in the cure. And the cure begins with something the endless giver has spent their whole life avoiding. Jung understood that beneath the compulsive giver lies a buried, disowned part of the self, what he called the shadow. And for the person who is endlessly nice, the shadow contains exactly the things they were never allowed to be: their assertiveness, their anger, their capacity to say no and mean it, their right to have needs, to take up space, to disappoint people and survive it. All of this was exiled in childhood, judged too dangerous, too selfish, too likely to cost them love. And it did not disappear. It went underground, where it has been quietly running their life ever since, leaking out as passive resentment, as burnout, as the exhaustion of a person who gives and is slowly filling with a bitterness they cannot admit. And Jung's path, the only real one, is for the person to descend and reclaim that shadow, not to become cruel, the fear that stops every kind person from doing this work, but to become whole, to integrate the very capacities they buried. Because the anger they exiled is also their ability to set boundaries and to defend what matters. The selfishness they were shamed for is also their capacity to have a self at all, to want things, to matter to themselves. The word no, which they treat as an act of violence, is in truth the thing that gives every yes its meaning. A person who cannot say no is not generous. They are simply unable to refuse. And a gift that cannot be refused is not a gift, it is a compulsion. Only the person who can say no can truly give, because only their yes is freely chosen. And this is where the law finally reverses, because the moment a person begins to set limits, to have needs, to occasionally be unavailable, to let their yes cost something and their no be real, their value in the eyes of others begins to climb. Not because they have become manipulative or started playing games, but because they have reintroduced the very things the mind uses to assign worth: limits, cost, the possibility of loss. The person who was taken for granted becomes, almost overnight, someone whose attention means something again, because it is no longer guaranteed. Their kindness, which was invisible when it was unconditional, becomes visible and precious the moment it is offered by choice rather than compulsion. Same warmth, same generous heart, but now given by a person who exists, who has edges, who could say no and chose to say yes. There is a subtlety here that Jung would insist on, because kind people always get it wrong at first. The goal is not to give less. It is to give from fullness instead of emptiness, from choice instead of fear, from a self that is intact instead of one that is disappearing. The transformed giver may end up giving just as much, but everything about it changes, because it now comes from a person who values themselves, and the world always takes its cue on how to treat someone from how that someone treats themselves. A person who abandons their own needs teaches everyone around them that their needs do not matter. A person who honors their own needs teaches everyone around them to honor them too. The outer world is simply following the instructions the giver hands it, and for their whole life, the endless giver has been handing out instructions to be devalued. Which brings us to the deepest truth Jung saw beneath all of it, the reason the pattern is so hard to break. Jung understood that the endless giver is terrified of one specific thing, that if they stop giving, if they start having needs and limits, they will be abandoned. This is the original wound speaking, the child who learned that love was conditional on usefulness, still running the show decades later, still convinced that the moment they stop earning love, it will vanish. And so they cling to the giving, even as it destroys them, because on the deepest level they believe it is the only thing keeping anyone around. But Jung saw the tragic error in this. The love that must be earned through self-erasure was never love at all. It was a transaction, and the people who only stay because someone gives endlessly were never truly bonded to that person. They were bonded to what they received. When the giver finally sets limits, some of those people will indeed leave. And this feels like proof of the giver's deepest fear. But it is the opposite. It is the pattern finally clearing out the relationships that were never real, to make room for the ones that can be. Because the person who is only valued for what they give is not actually loved. They are used, gently, by people who would move on the moment the giving stopped. And the person who is loved after they set boundaries, who is chosen even when they say no, who is valued even when they are not being useful, that person is, perhaps for the first time in their life, actually loved, for who they are, and not for what they provide. The endless giver spends their whole life afraid that boundaries will cost them love. Jung understood that boundaries are the only thing that ever reveals whether love was there at all. And now I need to speak to you directly. If you are the one who gives and is quietly taken for granted, if you have watched people chase those who offer them far less, while you, who offer everything, are moved to the bottom of the list. If there is a resentment growing in you that you are ashamed of, and an exhaustion you cannot explain, and a creeping sense that you have disappeared somewhere inside a life spent tending everyone but yourself, then hear what Jung would have told you. Your kindness is not the problem, and you do not need to lose it. But you have been giving from a wound, not from fullness, and the world has been reading that wound and treating you accordingly. The way back is not to give less love. It is to finally include yourself among the people you are kind to reclaim the no you buried, the needs you swallowed, the self you erased to be loved. Set one limit you have been afraid to set. Let your yes become a choice instead of a reflex. Stop teaching people that you do not matter, and watch how quickly they learn the new lesson. Because the moment you begin to value yourself, you hand the world a new set of instructions, and the same kindness that made you invisible will begin, at last, to make you valued. Not by giving more, by finally refusing to disappear. If this reached something real in you, don't let it fade when the screen goes dark. In the next video, I want to show you what Jung discovered about the strange guilt that rises the moment a kind person first sets a boundary. That wave of shame that tells them they've done something wrong when they've only done something new, and how to move through it without collapsing back into the old pattern that erased them. Because reclaiming yourself is not the hard part. Surviving the guilt that follows is, and Jung understood exactly how. I'll see you there.